A neighbor has obstructed the driveway of an elderly person. He desires retribution, and it costs money. The ambiance of your home is enhanced by your neighbors, who can sometimes be a complete nightmare or nice and welcoming. Some people believe that their unpleasant neighbors have forced them to leave. Still, it's a challenging scenario. But his neighbor nearly drove one Florida man insane. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. There was a new neighbor in the Florida suburb of Osceola. The pre-existing community did not give it much thought, but Oliver Lynch, a senior member of the community, would soon be impacted by his activities. Lynch and the other locals were in disbelief at what their new neighbor had unleashed on them. One individual had to do something about it, therefore. Oliver Lynch, who was 79 years old, had been contentedly residing in his neighborhood for 25 years, going about his daily activities without incident. Lynch was a man of strong principles and reasoning, but he was also adamant and uncompromising. Lynch would not only be rattled by what was about to occur in the neighborhood, but he would also have to respond. Lynch was aware that sitting around would do nothing. As an elderly person, he valued his living conditions and had a fondness for his area. It was his house, and he had lived there for a long time. He was aware that not many people showed concern for the elderly and felt it was his responsibility to change that. He expressed his frustrations and efforts to be shut down in public by saying, "I just hate being bullied. I hate to watch someone bulldoze over me because I still have some fight left in me." In an interview, he went on to say that this individual belonged to a generation that really stays out of trouble and avoids any potential arguments. Lynch's age group is unassuming and really wants to continue with their daily activities. Lynch saw that development was about to start on an adjacent tract of property by a neighbor. Lynch, minding his own business with regard to the new neighbor, and carried on with his daily activities without incident. He returned home one day to discover cinder blocks strewn in the center of his driveway. He wasn't concerned about the problem too much at first until he saw that these cinder blocks were attached to his driveway. Lynch's driveway was being attempted to be taken by this new neighbor. It was his driveway, and he would battle for it. He was not having any of it. It was obvious that these neighbors didn't agree on anything. They were not only diametrically opposed, but they also had no common ground. They had no idea that this would result in such a rift, but that is exactly what transpired when Oliver got home that day. This new neighbor, who was to be feared, was determined to define his area. He had already cemented the blocks to the driveway. Lynch could not get rid of them, and if he tried, it would ruin the whole aesthetic. Lynch knew that things would not end well. Lynch was shocked by this circumstance since, in his 79 years, it had never occurred before. He had seen much, no doubt, but nothing quite like this. That someone could do this to him and in his community was beyond his comprehension. Lynch, still in shock, started to become irritated with his neighbor's passive-aggressive behavior. "What's he going to do with those extra few yards of concrete over there?" he remembered even asking. Oliver was baffled as to who would do such an action. Not only did he not understand who would go to such lengths to split up the property, but more than that, he didn't know the land was his. To claim it, who did he think he was? Oliver discovered that the blocks were firmly fixed to the ground when he attempted to move them independently. He was really taken aback by his neighbor's actions and was unable to understand what was happening. Oliver believed that his neighbor had meticulously planned every detail and that he was unable to stop it. The blocks would remain where they were for the time being, but he could not allow his neighbor to get away with this. Oliver thought about it, and his confusion grew as he thought more. Even though he was new to the area, the man was picking fights. Lynch said that he had never witnessed someone treating another person with such disdain. In contrast to Oliver's expectations of living a tranquil life in his 80s, his new neighbor had other ideas. It was all for some land, ironically. Why was this extra room so important? Since these cinder blocks had been cemented, it was obvious Lynch would require a separate set of procedures to correct this error. He had to locate genuine video of the land to prove that it was his. Oliver made the sensible and calm decision to contact his neighbor first. He wanted to project a sense of civility since it worked for him in the past. The neighbor retorted angrily, saying, "No," with no intention of shifting the blocks, and the dispute went on. But according to his home's deed, he was entitled to 2 driveways of 12 feet each. This neighbor had no idea what was going to flare up in this suburban area. Oliver was clearly the owner, according to the deed, but the county refused to allow them to have any say since it was not significant. He would have to file a lawsuit against his new neighbor or hire a surveyor to review the deeds. Lynch simply wanted things to stop so he wouldn't have to pick one of these. His only desire was a peaceful resolution without the need for legal intervention. Despite his best efforts to resolve the situation, the neighbor refused to make any concessions. Since he had told them he was a minister or something, a man of God, he believed that his new neighbor was also acting hypocritically, but I don't think that's very Christian-like. Lynch was even more shocked that someone who identified as a man of God and whose area of specialty coincided with a church would act in such an un-Christian manner against their neighbor. He genuinely believed that a person of that kind would have some rational voice. Instead of getting better, the situation was getting far worse. There were only so many things he could do. He made the decision to seek counsel from the county once more and really hoped that someone would offer him the support he so well deserves. He knew deep down that it would not be simple to approach his neighbor, whatever the circumstances. Despite his best efforts, his neighbor refused to accept him. Lynch returned to the county authority and pleaded for assistance since he would not stand by. He knew it would take a long time to reclaim his land and that his neighbor would make things more difficult for him. Lynch, in a desperate attempt to save face, called the local press, and they broke the story about the altercation between the Osceola neighbors, much to his advantage. The media made every effort to assist Lynch, including contacting the neighbor but failing to establish a connection. The neighbor could feel ashamed since she didn't respond. Everything was amplified by the story breaking. Lynch's neighbor's reputation was not favorable, nor favorable at that moment. The public responded harshly to the neighbor, who was a devout man of religion, and backed with Lynch in doing so. The major focus of the comments was the neighbor's reaction at that time. The neighbor may have felt under investigation because everyone seemed to be supporting Lynch and believing that the neighbor was rude and unfair. The perception he would then have of the neighborhood and his reputation alarmed his neighbors. Why someone would want to behave in this way after only recently moving to the suburbs was beyond me. They would undoubtedly want to blend in and get along with everyone around them. The neighbor did not respond or provide any information. As more Osceola County residents learned of the circumstances, their anger at Oliver and the new neighbor grew. They even said that Lynch was being harassed by the newcomer. He entered and just stole the land, upsetting the old guy in the process. The neighbor remained still. To be honest, he was neither disturbed or hurt by Lynch or the public outcry. Lynch could not care less even if the vast majority of people were on his side. He then turned to the media once more, and WFTV returned to the scene to evaluate and provide further coverage. The incident quickly made headlines around the nation, and everyone had something to say about it. Though development was slow, this man and his neighbor were the talk of the town. Lynch then got in touch with the news to inform them of the situation. It seemed as if they were breaking apart, and the neighbor was finally comprehending. After a seemingly endless amount of time, Lynch had managed to reach his neighbor. After talking, they decided that something was going to happen. The people demanded answers since they knew about the problem. Would the neighbor raise his hand now that the ball was in his court? The neighbor may have realized what he did wrong from the commotion around the event because, at last, the two got down to a civil discussion. Lynch entered prepared to defend his position, and as the neighbor would soon see, he was entitled to the land based on the evidence he had gathered. Everything went smoothly, and the answer was on its way. After talking, Lynch and the neighbor decided that the blocks would eventually be taken down. His tenacity had paid off. It was known that the neighbor had surrounded Lynch and addressed him when the reporters obtained the specifics of the encounter. Abruptly, he said he didn't mean to make such a big deal out of it and bring so much attention to it. The neighbor was upset because he realized he had damaged his standing in the neighborhood. Despite all the attempts, it appears that there was a significant misinterpretation. We sincerely hope that the neighbor won't have any further miscommunications with the neighborhood's other residents. The people was really glad and happy that Lynch had regained his driveway and peace had been restored. The news that this handsome old guy had won the lawsuit came as a welcome surprise to everyone. The fact that the neighbor had turned out to be rather sensible and that the matter had been resolved allowed the neighborhood to relax. Who knows at the end of the day? Perhaps a friendly neighborly friendship was developing. From the moment the story broke, he was enthusiastically followed by a devoted following of people on the internet. They were even more happy to hear that things worked well, even though they had first treated the neighbor harshly. The 79-year-old would finally be at peace. Although Lynch might have easily harbored resentment, it was definitely preferable to get along with his neighbor. Ultimately, they would now be residing next to each other. From now on, they would be living in harmony and tranquility. Lynch's tenacity should serve as an example of how, on sometimes, standing up for what is rightfully yours may be worthwhile and ultimately beneficial. An ounce of community service will fix any problem. Even if the neighbor's relationship has not been followed up on, we may learn a useful lesson from their interactions. First and foremost, one must assert their rights and protect oneself, yet one should do it politely. It is absolutely unacceptable to be a pushover, and there are more effective ways to show your rudeness or aggression. Lynch and his neighbor, who live next door to one another, are fortunate to have settled their differences amicably. Oliver's strategy demonstrates how remaining true to your principles may help you achieve your goals without compromising who you are. But sometimes things don't work out the way they did in this instance. Some folks go to great lengths to irritate their neighbors. The fact that some neighbors can resolve their disputes in a matter of weeks or less is not all that unexpected. However, there are instances in which this isn't the case. An individual in a tiny Peoria, Illinois neighborhood has been embroiled in a quarrel for a considerable amount of time, more than 20 years to be exact. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.